Has someone ever tried to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself?
Imagine walking into your childhood home on Christmas Eve, arms full of grocery bags, coat still dusted with snow, cheeks stinging from the cold, expecting nothing more than the usual controlled chaos of a family holiday, your mother barking orders in the kitchen, your sister pretending to help, your father sipping something brown and silent, but instead, you stop in the hallway because something feels off, something you can't name yet, but it hits you anyway, like a shift in the air, like a rug's been pulled half an inch under your feet. You catch the scent of someone else's perfume coming from your bedroom, the one you've had since you were 12, the room where your high school trophies still gather dust on the shelves, where the mattress still sinks in on the left side the way your body always used to. And when you step closer, you see it. Your bedroom door is wide open, your bedding is gone, replaced by something floral and girly. There are fairy lights strung along the window frame, a pink duffel bag on your chair, and your younger cousin Krista, 23, hair in a messy bun, is sitting cross-legged on your bed scrolling through her phone like she owns the place. And you just stand there, holding two reusable grocery bags full of wine, bread rolls, and Brussels sprouts, feeling like a damn guest in the house you pay for. "Hey, Maya," Krista says without looking up, casual as if we've swapped rooms in some summer camp, as if this isn't my house, my room, my everything, and she's just visiting for a few days to play holiday princess. Behind me, my mom's voice rises from the kitchen, cheerful, too cheerful. "Oh, Maya, honey. You found Krista, good. We thought it would be fun for her to stay in your room this year. Give her the full cozy Christmas experience, you know?" I didn't answer right away. I blinked slowly and tried to remember if I had misheard her. Maybe she meant the guest room. Maybe she meant... No, she didn't. Because she walked out of the kitchen drying her hands on a dish towel, full of that forced joy she uses whenever she's about to bulldoze over my boundaries, and she looked right at me, smiling like this was all settled, like I was being silly for even needing it explained. "Don't worry," she said, patting my arm like I was a tired nurse at the end of a double shift. "We set up the couch for you. It's just for a few nights." I wanted to say something. God knows I wanted to. I opened my mouth and then closed it again because suddenly I was 17 again, back when it was easier to just nod and adapt and shrink myself down to whatever shape my mother needed for the week. And I watched her walk back into the kitchen, humming to herself, humming like nothing was wrong, like I should be grateful we still do Christmas at all. Krista giggled at something on her phone and then asked if I knew where the extra towels were. I pointed at the hall closet and walked to the kitchen because if I didn't do something normal, pour a glass of wine, put the damn bread in the oven, I might have snapped. Inside, my sister Lena was leaning on the counter eating olives straight out of the jar, acting like none of this was weird, and I wanted to grab her and say, "Why didn't you say something?" But instead I just poured wine and smiled like everything was fine. The rest of the evening played out like one long performance. They laughed about old family jokes, played the same stupid board games, blasted Mariah Carey like it was some sacred ritual. Nobody mentioned the room. Nobody asked if I was comfortable on the couch. And I sat there on the corner of that lumpy sectional, legs folded under me, holding a glass of wine and wondering how the hell I ended up so erased. There's a moment, I think every woman knows it, when you realize you've been volunteering your whole life for roles no one appreciates. The helper. The fixer. The one who always gives up her seat. The one who says, "It's okay, I'll take the couch." And they stop asking. They stop noticing. And when you do finally want to stand up and say, "Actually, no," it's already too late because they've built a world where your silence is part of the architecture. I went to bed last, after everyone else had already shuffled upstairs, Krista happily skipping into my room with hot cocoa in hand like she was on a Hallmark set. I stood in the hallway alone for a second, staring at my old bedroom door, still cracked open, the soft light of fairy lights blinking through. I could see my own high school diploma still hanging on the wall above her head. Then I turned away and walked downstairs, pulled the scratchy throw blanket off the back of the couch, curled up like an afterthought, and stared at the blinking lights on the Christmas tree for hours. And here's the part one want to ask you, because maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm overthinking it. If your family took your room, your actual bed, in the house you own, and gave it to a 20-something cousin who doesn't pay a damn bill, would you say something? Would you fight? Or would you do what I did? Because I didn't yell. I didn't slam doors. I didn't throw a single plate. I just laid there, still and quiet, and started making a list in my head. A list of everything in that house that still had my name on it. And by the time the sun came up, I knew exactly what I was going to do. By the time morning came, I was already on my second cup of black coffee, sitting silently at the edge of the couch that doubled as my bed, staring out the frosted living room window at the white stillness outside. A quiet so different from the rising noise behind me, voices growing louder in the kitchen, pans clattering, footsteps upstairs, and the familiar rhythm of holiday cheer that, for everyone but me, had apparently picked up exactly where it left off. My back ached from the uneven cushions, and my neck had a sharp kink from sleeping half-sitting, half-lying, twisted in a position no body over 40 should ever attempt, but I said nothing, just stretched my shoulders and took another sip, watching the steam curl into the cold morning air like I could somehow disappear into it if I stared long enough. No one asked how I slept. No one even glanced at the couch or the folded blanket I had neatly placed at the end like some obedient hotel guest. Instead, Lena came bouncing down the stairs in leggings and an oversized sweatshirt, her hair in a messy top knot, already carrying a tray of cranberry muffins like she had personally baked them, which I knew for a fact she had not, and called out in that fake chipper voice she uses when she knows she's wrong but refuses to admit it. "You're up early. Hope the couch wasn't too rough." She didn't wait for an answer. She just vanished into the kitchen, where Mom was already shuffling pans and humming to herself, that same old off-tune version of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" she sang every year like she thought it made everything more magical. I got up, walked over to the island, and started helping automatically, cutting fruit, arranging plates, doing what I've always done, because that's how deeply the habit runs, like muscle memory, like breathing. And the absurdity of it all just sat in my chest like a weight I couldn't name. I wanted to say something. God, I wanted to. But it felt like yelling into the wind. And I knew exactly how it would go, too. If I brought it up, if I dared to suggest that maybe it was insane to give away my room in my own house and expect me to sleep on the damn couch, my mother would put down her spatula, tilt her head slightly, and let out one of those long sighs that's more accusation than breath. Then she'd say, "Maya, don't be dramatic. It's just a few nights. You're always so touchy about these things." And she wouldn't mean it cruelly, not out loud, at least, but she'd say it in that soft, weary tone, the one that implies I am the problem. Not the decision. Not the total lack of communication. Not the invasion of my space. Just me. My reaction. My tendency to take things personally. The truth is, this moment wasn't isolated. It was the slow buildup of 1,000 other moments just like it, Christmases and Thanksgivings where I cooked but wasn't thanked, birthdays I hosted but wasn't celebrated, weekends when Lena's kids tore through my living room and left it a wreck while everyone praised her for just showing up. It was the way Uncle Rick always parked in my spot, always ate first, always took leftovers without asking. It was the way Krista walked into that house like it was hers the moment she turned 18, calling it Aunt Lillian's place, never once acknowledging the fact that the mortgage was mine, the upkeep was mine, the taxes were mine. And the only reason that roof stayed over all of their heads was because I had worked quietly, steadily, and without praise for over 20 years to build a life they barely seemed to recognize as mine. I started noticing the little things more as the day wore on. Krista walked through the living room in one of my sweaters. My sweater. The navy one I had kept folded in the back of my closet. She laughed and said she found it in the dresser upstairs and figured it must have been left behind from whoever used to sleep up there. Then there was Lena's boyfriend, Trevor, who barely knows me beyond surface-level hellos, who made some offhand comment during lunch about how this house really has a Lena vibe, like she had decorated it. Like she had designed the kitchen remodel I paid for with 3 months of overtime and skipped vacations. He didn't mean anything by it. None of them ever do. That's the problem. I sat through dinner, said nothing, smiled when I needed to, passed the potatoes, refilled glasses, and laughed on cue. From the outside, I probably looked fine. Pleasant. Content, even. I'd gotten good at wearing that face. It was easier than explaining why I was slowly suffocating in the middle of a holiday dinner surrounded by people I was supposed to love. At one point, Krista went upstairs to FaceTime her friends and show them her cute Christmas room. She used those exact words. Her room. I heard her through the ceiling vents. Something cracked in me then, not loudly, not visibly, but quietly, like the first fracture in a frozen lake, the kind that spider webs out under the surface long before the ice breaks. I stood there in the kitchen, alone for a moment, holding a wet dish towel, and realized that I was no longer angry. I was just done. Done trying to earn respect I should have been given. Done waiting to be acknowledged for what I contribute. Done playing along in a house that only remembers I exist when something needs fixing. I wiped my hands on the towel, walked into the hallway, and opened the small cabinet near the stairs where I kept a shoebox with the spare keys. I took them out quietly, placed them in my pocket, and returned to the kitchen with the same bland smile they all expect. Later that night, after the wine had been poured and the Christmas movie was playing and everyone was tucked into their warm, borrowed beds, I laid on that damn couch again, staring up at the ceiling, listening to them snore and shift and dream above me. And I knew with more certainty than I had ever known anything that something inside me had finally reached its limit. They would not see it coming. They wouldn't even think I was capable of it. And that made it all the better. Because the best kind of revenge isn't loud. It's not thrown dishes or screaming matches. The best kind is quiet, thoughtful, surgical, the kind that takes everything away without a word. And I had just decided it was time. It was somewhere between the clink of wine glasses over breakfast, because that's how they do it now, holiday mimosas at 10 in the morning like it's normal to get buzzed before eggs, and the moment Krista complained that the hot water in the shower took too long. That something in me finally began to solidify, not in a burst of anger or resentment, but in the slow, burning clarity of someone who's seen just enough to stop pretending. I didn't say anything out loud, not then, not yet, but I watched. I watched all of them move through my house like it belonged to someone else, like it was some family vacation home passed down by generations, not something I had worked 2 jobs to afford, not the same house I had quietly renovated piece by piece, paycheck by paycheck. After Mom and Dad had run it halfway into the ground with decades of hoarding and deferred maintenance. They had lived in it like renters, but I had turned it into a home. My home. And still, they walked through it like I was just a guest with good timing. I spent the morning cleaning up after them while they laughed in the background, every surface cluttered with coffee cups, open makeup bags, half-eaten cookies, and those ridiculous red Solo cups someone always insists on using for nostalgia. I wiped down the counters, took out the trash, reset the living room after they'd moved all the furniture for their annual family charades game, and when I went to light a candle, one of the expensive ones I keep hidden in the linen closet, I found it already burned down to half. Krista, no doubt. She has this way of helping herself to whatever isn't nailed down, always under the guise of just borrowing, and no one ever says anything because she's young and pretty and upbeat, and apparently that gives her a lifetime pass. But it wasn't just the candle. It was the whole day. It was the way Lena casually mentioned that this place wouldn't even exist without Mom and Dad, a comment she tossed out while sipping champagne and flipping through her phone, as if the monthly mortgage payments that left my bank account like clockwork were some background noise to be ignored. I stood there, holding a spatula, unable to even form a response, because the weight of what she said wasn't in the words themselves, it was in the absolute confidence with which she said them. They believed it. They genuinely believed this house still belonged to our parents, or worse, to all of us equally, like some inherited family cottage instead of a property I had saved for, bought in my own name, and held onto through years of financial strain and personal sacrifice. Later, after lunch, I stepped outside for a moment to breathe, to let the cold air cut through the fog of frustration building behind my eyes. Snow was starting to fall again, soft and slow, The kind of snow that muffles sound and makes everything feel far away. I stood on the porch, watching my breath rise in the air, and that's when I heard them through the open front window, Mom, Lena, and Uncle Rick, talking like I wasn't even part of the equation. They weren't yelling, but they weren't whispering either, and their voices carried with the ease of people who had never once considered the walls might have ears. Lena was saying something about how Maya's always been a little uptight, and Mom chimed in with her favorite refrain, "She just gets too worked up over small things," and then Rick, who never holds back after a few drinks, laughed and said, "Well, she's lucky she's got the house at all, if we're being honest. I mean, most people in her position wouldn't even have that kind of help." Help. That word landed so heavily in my stomach I nearly choked on it. Help. As if they had given me this place, as if I hadn't clawed my way through the housing market, begged banks for loans, spent my weekends hauling broken furniture to the dump and scraping mold out of corners while they all sat comfortably in rental apartments they couldn't hold onto for more than a year at a time. They had helped me, apparently. That was the story now. I stepped back inside before they could see my face, before I did something I couldn't take back. The warmth hit me like a wall, and the noise returned, the music, the laughter, the hollow chatter that filled every inch of the house, drowning out anything real. I smiled at Krista as she skipped by in my slippers, eating from a bag of chocolate chips she'd pulled out of my baking cabinet without asking, and she waved like everything was perfectly fine, like this was her house now too. And maybe it was, in their eyes. Maybe I had let it become that. Because for years, I had allowed them to treat me like the support beam no one ever thinks. I paid the bills, hosted the holidays, kept the plumbing working and the lights on, but I never demanded credit, never stood up and said, "This is mine," because I thought being generous meant being quiet. I thought being family meant you shouldn't have to draw lines in permanent marker. But as I walked back into the kitchen, where they were now casually assigning bedrooms for the next few nights, Uncle Rick and Aunt Donna taking the guest room, Lena and Trevor moving into the study with an air mattress, Krista staying exactly where she was in my room, I realized that lines drawn in pencil are too easy to erase. So I stopped washing dishes. I turned off the sink. I stood still for a full 10 seconds, letting the noise of them crash around me, letting the whole twisted picture of what this family had become settle into place like puzzle pieces finally locking in. And then I picked up my phone, walked quietly to the mudroom where no one could see me, and called my locksmith. Not for the next day. Not for next week. For tonight. The voice on the other end recognized me, as he's replaced these locks before, years ago when I first moved in, first took ownership, first claimed the space as mine, and when I told him I needed them changed again, discreetly. Preferably around midnight, he didn't ask why. He just said he'd be there. And that was the moment I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Not anger, not vindictiveness, not even satisfaction. Just that simple, solid feeling of having your hand back on the steering wheel after drifting too long down someone else's road. Because they might have taken over the bedrooms, the food, the decorations, even the goddamn sweaters from my closet, but they had forgotten one simple, immutable fact. The house was mine. And by morning, they would all remember it. The hours between my call to the locksmith and the moment the last voice upstairs went quiet felt like a kind of suspended animation, like the world had paused just long enough to allow me the stillness required for what I was about to do. A stillness not just in the physical sense, but something deeper, something cellular, as if my bones had finally stopped rattling from the decades of swallowed words and politely choked down frustrations. I moved through the house like a ghost in a place that was once mine, careful not to draw attention, performing small acts of hospitality just convincing enough to keep everyone's assumptions intact, refilling wine glasses, clearing plates from the floor, smiling absently at Lena's boyfriend when he suggested we all go skiing next year, as if this year was going so perfectly it needed to be repeated. Upstairs, Krista was already snoring in what was still, technically and legally, my bed, wrapped in my linens, surrounded by the things I had chosen and folded and dusted. Her duffel bag lying open like the luggage of a tourist who had no intention of checking out. I passed her door on my way to the hallway closet where I kept the small lockbox that held the deed to the house, just in case anyone ever dared to question what was mine and what had merely been tolerated. I didn't need the paper for the locksmith, of course, but I took it anyway, folded it into my coat pocket, not for proof, but for the satisfaction of the weight of it against my leg, a reminder that what I was about to do wasn't a betrayal. It was a reclamation. The living room was empty by then, the fire burning low, flickering shadows against the same walls I had painted with my own hands, walls they now leaned on, spilled drinks against, decorated with garlands and lights like it was all part of some shared family heirloom instead of a home I had bled for. I sat down quietly on the couch, my temporary bed these past few nights, if you could call it that, and waited. I watched the minutes tick by with the kind of clarity that only comes when something final is about to happen, when you're standing at the edge of a cliff not out of impulse, but out of long calculation. At precisely 12:27 in the morning, headlights sliced across the front windows in a slow, quiet arc, and I rose with the blanket still wrapped around my shoulders, stepping barefoot across the wood floors to the door like it was a procession. I opened it before he knocked. Doug, the locksmith, stood there in his heavy coat and work gloves, giving me a look that was equal parts confusion and recognition, like he knew something had shifted even if he didn't need to ask what. "You sure?" he said in a low voice, respectful of the sleeping house behind me, a house full of people who had no idea that the locks on their reality were about to be changed literally. I nodded once, slowly, and stepped aside. The process was quiet, practiced, and oddly clinical. Doug worked with the efficiency of a man who'd done this 1,000 times, unscrewing, replacing, aligning, sealing, while I stood at the base of the stairs listening for any signs of movement above. But there were none. They were sleeping. All of them. Sleeping in the security of someone else's generosity, so confident in their unspoken ownership of my space that it didn't occur to them that the ground beneath their feet was already shifting. As Doug packed up his tools, he looked at me again, this time more carefully. "You don't have to explain," he said, voice steady, kind in a way that didn't feel pitying. "But whatever this is, it's your house. You do what you need to." And with that, he left. No receipt. No drawn-out conversation. Just a man doing his job for a woman who had finally remembered her own name. When the new locks clicked into place, the sound echoed in my chest like a closing vault, like the ceiling of a tomb that no longer held me hostage. I didn't go back to the couch. Instead, I grabbed my already packed bag from the laundry room, one I had quietly filled over the last 24 hours, item by item, memory by memory. And I walked out the back door with the ease of someone who had already grieved everything she was leaving behind. I locked that door, too, then stepped into the freezing night air where my car waited, engine running, seat warm, music low ready. But I didn't drive far. I parked 2 streets down, just far enough to disappear but close enough to see the front porch. I reclined the seat slightly, pulled my coat tighter, and waited. I wanted to see their faces. I wanted to watch what it looked like when entitlement hit a wall. When the first one woke up a little after 7, judging by the soft glow of dawn, I saw the lights flicker on in the kitchen, then the guest room, then the upstairs hallway. I imagined the shuffle of feet, the yawned good mornings, the slow realization as someone tried the front door to grab a paper or smoke a cigarette, and instead of the expected creak and welcome chill, they were met with resistance. A locked door. The sound of the knob not turning, not giving. I watched as Uncle Rick stepped outside in a robe and slippers, banging on the door with the confused frustration of a man who has never once thought to question his access to other people's things. He rattled the handle, looked around, then called out something I couldn't hear. More lights turned on. Curtains rustled. Mom appeared next, hair pinned back sloppily, wearing one of Dad's old sweatshirts like it was still 1995, peering out the window with a look that flickered rapidly between confusion and irritation. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I just watched. And the part that will stay with me for the rest of my life, the part one will carry like a trophy, not out of cruelty but out of vindication, was the moment Lena came out onto the porch in my slippers, holding her phone, eyes still bleary, and said loudly, "Where's Maya?" Because that's when it clicked for all of them. That I wasn't there. That I hadn't been tricked or forced or chased out. I had left. By choice. And I had taken the house with me. It was a beautiful kind of silence then. No one screamed. No one pounded on the door like in some movie scene. They just stood there, like people who had finally woken up from a dream that wasn't theirs to begin with. And I stayed parked down that street for 20 more minutes, just long enough to watch the sun rise over the roof of a house that had always been mine, and to make peace with the fact that sometimes the only way to be heard is to say nothing and lock the damn door behind you. There's a particular kind of quiet that falls over a house when its foundation, both literal and emotional, has been shaken, not by natural disaster or violence, but by something much colder and sharper, clarity. That morning, as the December sun climbed reluctantly through the low winter clouds, casting a pale, unforgiving light over the front lawn and the snow-slicked roof, I sat alone in a rented studio apartment barely 10 miles away. Coffee cooling untouched in front of me, wrapped in the silence that follows after you've finally done the thing everyone thought you never would. The phone lay flat on the table next to me, buzzing every few minutes with texts that I didn't need to open to understand. I could see the panic in my mind clearly enough, the disbelief, the accusations, the scramble to make sense of a world where I had stopped saying yes. But the strange thing was, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel either. What I felt was something closer to peace, that uneasy but necessary peace that comes when you finally stop carrying other people's comfort on your back like a burden you were never meant to bear in the first place. The first voicemail was from my mother, her voice higher-pitched than usual, with that breathless edge she only used when she knew she'd gone too far but hadn't yet decided how to admit it. She didn't apologize. Of course not. What she said instead was that I was scaring everyone and that this wasn't like me, and we just need to talk this through like adults. But we both knew there was no we in this equation anymore, and the only part that scared them was the part where I had finally stopped playing along. The next call came from Lena, and her message was shorter, sharper, less polite. She wanted to know what kind of stunt I thought I was pulling, said it was a real betrayal, and that I was acting unstable. That word hit me like a slap, not because it was accurate, but because it was so deeply predictable. That's the word people like her reach for when the quiet one finally breaks pattern, when the oldest sibling, the caretaker, the unpaid therapist, the doormat, the bank, the couch, the backup plan suddenly decides she's not showing up for duty anymore. They call you unstable because it's easier than admitting they were never entitled to you in the first place. But the voicemail that broke something in me came from Krista, sweet, clueless, unbothered Krista, who said, in her usual chipper voice, "I don't get what the big deal is. I was only going to be there for a few days. You didn't have to be so extra about it." And there it was. The root of it all. The blinding entitlement. The complete detachment from the idea that maybe, just maybe, someone else's space, someone else's history, someone else's comfort deserved respect, or at the very least, consideration. They had moved through my home like it was a timeshare on loan from the universe, never stopping to ask what it cost me to maintain, to hold together, to sacrifice for. They weren't just locked out of a house that morning, they were locked out of a version of me that no longer existed. And still, a part of me wondered more than once, more than I care to admit, if I had done the right thing. I turned the question over and over in my mind as I sat in that rented space, surrounded by beige walls and mismatched furniture, not because I wanted to go back, but because I knew the version of myself who had lived in that house had always been the one to choose peace over pride, silence over conflict, service over self. But sometimes, walking away isn't abandonment. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you from disappearing completely. By noon, the texts had started to shift in tone. Uncle Rick asked me how long I planned to keep this up, like I was throwing a tantrum instead of issuing a boundary. My mother tried again, this time with soft threats disguised as concern, something about what people would think if they found out. Lena switched gears entirely and said maybe this wasn't about the room, maybe I'd just been harboring resentment for years, which was supposed to sound like insight, but landed more like insult. And it was then, in that moment, that I realized the most painful part of all of it wasn't that they had taken advantage of me, that had happened for years. in dozens of small and subtle ways. It was that they never once expected consequences. They thought their good intentions, or their shared blood, or their collective sense of holiday tradition would be enough to protect them from accountability. They thought I would always be there, no matter how little space they left for me. I didn't reply. Not that day. Not the next. I let the silence speak in a way I never had the nerve to before. And as the days passed, and the snow melted just a little, and the house sat cold and quiet and entirely mine, I began to understand that this wasn't about punishment, it was about release. I had spent too many years waiting for people to understand boundaries I had never clearly drawn, and now that they finally saw them, etched in steel, clicked into place with every changed lock, they could no longer pretend they hadn't known. And I could no longer pretend I hadn't known what they were capable of, once the illusion of entitlement was stripped away. Weeks later, my mother sent one final message, the tone more careful this time, quieter, almost fragile. She said she hoped I was well, that they were all giving me space, that whenever I was ready to talk, the door was open. But she didn't say whose door. And she didn't ask whose house. Maybe, in her own way, she finally understood. Or maybe not. It doesn't matter now. Because this isn't the part where I tell you everything ended in hugs and understanding. This isn't the story of a family reunion, a weepy sit-down at the dining table, a group apology wrapped in warm, tidy closure. The truth is, I don't know what happens next. I don't know if they'll ever understand what they did or what I took back. I don't know if I'll let them in again, or if the silence between us will stretch on into the next holiday, and the one after that, until they forget what it was ever like to assume I would always be there. All I know is this. On that cold, brilliant Christmas morning, while they stood outside in borrowed coats, calling my name with voices full of shock and denial and disbelief, I sat alone in a quiet place, wrapped in nothing but my own decision, and for the first time in my life, I felt like the ground beneath me actually belonged to me. And for now, that is enough.